Okie dokie. I think we're good to go after already having a huge amount of technical difficulties tonight. But I'm here. As many of you guys may notice, the much better looking half of Married with Dragons unfortunately cannot join us tonight. However, we will proceed regardless. So, welcome to Married with Dragons. My name is Ben. And tonight I'm going to be going over my top 10 tips to be a good DM. I figured as the lovely Alex cannot be here tonight, I thought I might as well focus on some specifics around actually being a dungeon master in Dungeons and Dragons. At one point I did think maybe I should just do an entire show filled with my terrible D&D jokes, but after being hit with some better judgment, I figured I better not do that. We can't have all my jokes getting used in the one episode. But yeah, I'm going to go through what I believe are 10 top tips for being a really good DM. I guess one thing that is... I'm still going to do a joke at the end, by the way. Just because I'm doing an entire episode of jokes doesn't mean I'm not doing any jokes at all. And yeah, I think one thing to keep in mind, I guess, when talking about this topic of, being a good DM or a dungeon master, is that there is no right or wrong way necessarily to play Dungeons and Dragons or to be a dungeon master. So what I'll be conveying tonight is my opinion. Obviously, there's no true hard fact, I guess. At the end of the day, no matter how your games are being run or played, as long as everyone is having fun, that's really the only thing that matters. So just keep in mind that, like I said, this is my opinion, and I'm going to be trying to link in some tips for both new aspiring dungeon masters as well as people that have been doing it for a little bit of time as well, and are maybe looking to up their dungeon master abilities. I've been a dungeon master for a little while now. It's been I want to say 3 or 4 years. I could be wrong, but it's been a fair while. I've run a couple campaigns. By no stretch of the imagination do I think I'm the perfect dungeon master. Obviously, one of the beauties of playing D&D and running the game as well is that you're always learning new and different ways of doing things. But through my experience, I've certainly picked up on a few bits and pieces that I think can be really helpful for those of you who are thinking about maybe giving dungeon mastering a try. And to go along with the topic, I've got my favourite Dungeon Master mug tonight. I like to drink out of it when my players are doing something stupid. To keep me hydrated, as I am without my better half tonight. So, I say top 10 tips. Technically, there's 11. But top 10 sounds heaps better. Bit of alliteration, rolls off the tongue a bit better. So technically there is 11, but the 11th one's really small anyway. So we'll say top 10. So the first tip is going to seem pretty basic and pretty simple, I guess, but it's really important. It is simply get started. What I mean by this is the best way to improve as a dungeon master and develop as a dungeon master is to simply give it a go. So firstly, as part of the getting started process, make sure that you get the core books. Make sure you have at least the player's handbook, at least the dungeon master's guide, and it helps to have the monster manual as well. With the internet nowadays, you can get lots of stuff off the internet, but I would say those 3 core rule books are really, really important. I would certainly recommend reading through the Dungeon Master's Guide, or at least the sections that relate to you. You don't need to know all of the rules back to front as a dungeon master. A lot of people have this conception that you have to know everything about the game. You don't. You can look up stuff during the game. I guarantee you that there's going to be plenty of rules that you're not going to be able to remember everything. It's a big game, so there's going to be plenty of stuff that you're not going to be able to remember off the top of your head. But get into it, have a bit of a read, get a good understanding of the mechanics of the game, how the game works, and then get a group of friends together and just jump right into it. What's that meme? The Shia LaBeouf, just do it. Is my first tip. I apologise for the cringy do it, but seriously, getting straight into it and learning through experience is one of the best things I can recommend, as far as getting some confidence as well with your abilities as a dungeon master. Tip number 2, and I think this is particularly important for newer Dungeon Masters, but also really, really important if you're playing with a group of players that you haven't played with before, is have a really strong session 0. Now, what I mean by strong session 0, so for those of you who aren't aware, session 0 is basically an opportunity for everyone to get together before the first session of a campaign to figure out basically what sort of game you want to play, make sure all the players are on the same page about the sort of game that you want to play as well. For example, you don't want to have some players that really want a metagame or want a really gritty, tough campaign or something that's super deadly or combat focused, and then you have other players who really want puzzles and role play. You want to make sure that everyone's on the same page about the campaign that you're going to be playing and running, so that there aren't any misconceptions or confusion when the game actually starts. Also, it's a fantastic opportunity to bring up any homebrew rules that you might want to introduce, or any changes to the core rules of the game that you might want to make. Make sure everyone's okay with that. Basically, the whole point of the session 0 is to get everyone on the same page as to what you can expect in playing through that campaign. Also a really fantastic time for everyone to create some characters together and have a bit of fun doing that. Creating characters is always a lot of fun, and it's a great opportunity as well if there are players who haven't necessarily played Dungeons and Dragons before. It's a great opportunity to teach them how to create a character as well. Everyone's in a group, everyone can ask questions together, which is really, really cool. And that sort of actually links in with one point, with the first point I made, getting started, talking about what kind of game you want to play. If you are a new Dungeon Master and you haven't being a DM before, I would recommend maybe picking out a pre-written module to make life a little bit easier for yourself. Lots of people find it both easier and harder to run the pre-written modules. I would suggest, if you haven't done it before, choosing a pre-written module, because it'll give you a lot of ideas, a lot of material to work with straight from the get-go, taking away a lot of that pressure to come up with everything just straight off the top of your head as a Dungeon Master. Really reduces, I guess, the amount of prep time that's required. So yeah, that's tip 2. Oof, need some more water out of my DM mug. It's not a tip, but you should definitely stay hydrated. Tip 3, always seek advice. Now, this is a really, really important one, and it's one that there's sort of a lot of facets involved in this. What I mean by this is not necessarily just talking to other Dungeon Masters, and this is not just for new Dungeon Masters either. I myself am always seeking advice from other Dungeon Masters out there. For example, one of my very best friends is a Dungeon Master as well, and I'm constantly going to him for some advice on how he runs things, or how he would tackle a particular situation, or how he goes about planning particular things, to get another view on how to deal with particular things, and potentially uncover better ways of doing something that you might not have considered. But also not just talking to people, going online, reading through Reddit, looking at advice. There's heaps of D&D Reddits out there, looking at YouTube videos, tuning into your favourite D&D podcast ever, Married with Dragons, here every week. Had to do the plug. But really trying to make sure that you are getting as much information as possible from as many different sources, even on topics that you think you're really solid with as a Dungeon Master. You might think you've got a really fantastic way of running a particular part of combat, or a particular spell or a ruling or something. But then when you see online, talking to a mate or however it might be, you come across something, hey, I didn't actually think of that before. That's actually a really interesting way of running it. I might try that for my next group. And it's a great way to keep it fresh. It's a great way to, it's best to have other views. Obviously you can sort of get stuck in a one-track mind sometimes when looking at that sort of stuff. So it's great to have some outside influences to really develop your skills as a Dungeon Master. And like I said, not just for new players, but for any Dungeon Master out there, always trying to, broaden your horizons and look into different ways of potentially doing some bits and pieces. I really love that advice, that particular tip. I think that's one of the most important ones. Tip number 4, probably one of the more difficult ones for some people maybe out there, but be confident. Now, I guess this tip will you'll develop this with practice and with time. But it is really important to be confident, even if you don't necessarily know. Potentially, maybe you're rattling something off the top of your head, or you haven't thought about it much before, or something's taken a bit of a turn that you weren't quite prepared for. Being confident in your delivery is a really important part of being a dungeon master, because it really encourages to keep immersion in the game, and really that's one of the major parts of D&D is having that immersion into this fantasy world, and really getting to experience that. And the more confident you are with the way you, even the simple things, like it might be the way you're describing a room, it might be the way you're describing a particular character, it could be even you're doing a silly voice for an NPC, whatever it may be confident in your ability to do that. You don't have to be a world-class actor or narrator or anything to that extent, but the players are going to really get into it a lot more, really buy into the story a lot more if you're also confident with what you're selling, and even if you're not confident, just sort of pretend you are. But yeah, that is something that you will certainly develop over time after having a bit of practice and DMing a little bit. But yeah, certainly something that is really impactful on how the players are going to experience the game. Tip number 5, nearly halfway. Well, we are halfway. Apparently, I can't divide 10. One tip not on the list. Maths, develop your maths. Tip number 5, get creative. Now, this is one of the more fun DM tips I can give. This is one of the best parts about being a dungeon master. Certainly you can be creative as a player as well. But being a dungeon master really gives you the ability to do whatever it is that you want, whatever your brain may come up with, the great, cool, wacky ideas that you may have. And you don't have to totally go off the rails, even if it's something simple like you're looking through the rules and you're looking at a particular ruling or the way a particular spell works, and you're thinking, that doesn't really make sense to me. I don't really like how that mechanic works. Get creative, and you can always run it a different way. If you are changing core mechanics, I would suggest that that's something that you bring up in the strong session 0, back to tip 2. As obviously it's good to make players aware of if there are any major rule changes, especially if they've played before and they're expecting something to work a particular way. But yeah, get creative. Make up your own spells. One of the best ways to get creative as a DM, which you don't have to run by your players first, is change the monsters. At the end of the day, the rules are just a guidelines, and some of the most fun you can have as a dungeon master is when you edit the stat blocks of all the monsters in the monster manual. You completely come up with a homebrew monster to throw at your players, because that way it really keeps them on their toes, and you still get to really enjoy that exciting creative outlet. And it makes for the most memorable experiences as well. If you're editing characters, even if you're doing it on the fly, it is going to make for some really memorable combat encounters, because it's not going to be something that the players will have necessarily run into before, and they may not necessarily run into again. So strongly encourage being creative as a dungeon master, especially considering you're literally the creator of the world. You control everything other than your players' characters. So have fun with it, and really, don't be afraid to, think outside the box with that creative way of thinking. Tip number 6, I would say this might be my favorite, or my most important one on the list. I haven't ranked these, by the way. I've literally just noted them down in a random order. I haven't ranked them as such, but this one's really, really important. Number 6, talk to your players. And this is in a lot of different aspects of the game. One important part is getting feedback from your players, not necessarily after every session, but getting feedback from your players around, especially if you've introduced a homebrew rule or something. If you've introduced something from session 0, talk to them after 1 or 2 sessions and say, hey guys, Do you think this ruling is working out okay? I'm enjoying it, or I'm not enjoying it. What do you guys think? Get some feedback from your players around how that might be working, or even something as simple as, hey guys, how are you enjoying the campaign so far? Are you having fun? Are you not having fun? A player might say, oh, there's not as much combat as I thought there would be. Everyone might be like, oh, we'd really enjoy some more combat. Sweet. Because of talking to your players and getting that bit of feedback, you can incorporate that into your future sessions. Or, a really, really big one as well, if there are any problem players, a bit of a tough subject sometimes for Dungeon Masters out there. Best way to work towards resolving that is to talk to the player, explain to them, hey, this particular thing that you're doing, or your character having a particular negative flaw that's impacting on all of the other players. This is having a negative impact on the game. Can you make sure that you change this in the future? It's such an important way to ensure that everyone in the group gets to enjoy the game. Everyone in the group gets to have a little bit of input into the game as well, into the campaign overall. But also just it's nice as well to ensure that you get a bit of feedback for yourself as well. Hey, my players actually said that they really enjoyed today's session. Fantastic. Maybe I don't have to be so harsh on myself and my Dungeon Master skills. So it's great to get that sort of feedback. It can be, it could be as a group or privately talking to or messaging some of the players, but really, really important to make sure that you are communicating with your players on a regular basis. Because like I said, some players might not feel comfortable saying, hey, this particular way we're doing things, or this particular player is really negatively impacting me. So sometimes you might have to ask for that information as the Dungeon Master. Sometimes it's your job, I guess, to be a bit of a mediator of information. But yeah, talking to your players is probably one of the most important tips I could give any Dungeon Master and any player, to be honest, in the game, is just make sure you are being vocal about what you're liking, what you're not liking, if there are any issues. Tip number 7 now. Tip number 7, be a player sometimes. Now, this tip might be a little bit of a curveball for some of you out there, but it is a fantastic idea if you're wanting to be a Dungeon Master, or if you are a Dungeon Master. It's a fantastic idea to ensure that every now and then at least you are a player in a campaign, or a one-shot, or whatever it might be. But it's really important to ensure that every now and then you do actually get to experience being a player. The reason behind this, and I've noticed it sometimes myself as well, in the most recent campaign I was a player in that my friend was running, I can remember thinking at times, being in the player's spot and being in the player's shoes, I can see that if I was DMing, my campaign, and picking up on things that I might do, or thinking like, as a player, I actually really enjoy this stuff. So then you can transfer that back to your skills as a Dungeon Master. I remember as a player, I really enjoyed this aspect of the game. I should take a step back and allow the players to enjoy this aspect of the game. Taking, when I was a player, my friend who was being the Dungeon Master was really, really fantastic in a lot of different ways, in heaps of different ways. Sort of looking at and thinking, right, as a player, I really enjoyed when the Dungeon Master did this, or how the Dungeon Master handled that. And then thinking, right, I want to make sure that I'm implementing that into my Dungeon Master capabilities as well. So it's something that's very hard to pick up on if you are not a player, because it's very easy, and I notice I do it sometimes myself, it's very easy to look at things through a Dungeon Master lens, if you will. And looking at things only through a Dungeon Master lens can sort of distort the way that you think the game might be played or might be being enjoyed. Because you've got to remember, as a Dungeon Master, you know all the secrets and the stuff going on behind the scenes. And so, particularly if you're trying to make like a captivating mystery or puzzle for them to solve, sometimes it's important to be a player or think about it from the player's point of view, because sometimes you can be making it far too difficult without meaning to. I'm not sure if I'm actually... Oh, I do apologise if we are having any delays. Our computer is terrible, and so I'm not too sure if I've been cutting in and out. So I do apologise if that is the case. But yeah, when you are creating stuff like that, if you, for example, if you're creating a puzzle or something, you might think, oh, this is easy. The players will have no issue doing this whatsoever. But you've got to remember, you know the answer. So of course, you think it's easy as the dungeon master. So things like that, it's really important to make sure that you are a player sometimes so that you can see things from that point of view, look at the way the game has been played from that point of view, because they don't see the game or play the game the same way you are, because obviously the player and the dungeon master are two very, very different roles. Equally as important, but very, very different. So yeah, really, really, I think important to try and be a player at least sometimes to actually improve your skills as a dungeon master. Number 8, one of the more fun tips for the dungeon masters out there: don't be afraid to go off track or kill a character. I originally actually had that tip written as don't be afraid to kill a player. Do not kill your players. Don't commit murder. It's okay if you kill their characters in game, but certainly don't take out your players in real life. But yeah, don't be afraid to go off track. Don't be afraid to even kill a character if it comes up. I'm certainly not saying go out of your way to do these things. But it's important to realize as well that as a dungeon master, you can do preparation, you can plan, you can try and be as prepared as possible, but I guarantee you, there's a Married with Dragons promise that your players will do things that surprise you. They will do things that go off track or do things that you're not prepared for, and that is fine. In fact, it's great. It makes it even more exciting for you as a dungeon master, because you get to experience that in real time with the party as well. Obviously, it's great to be prepared and know what's going on, but when the party goes off track and does something wacky, you as a dungeon master get to think, what's going to happen next? Are they going to, what's going to be the outcome of these decisions? So roll with that. Do not be afraid of that at all. And in the same vein, don't be afraid to kill your characters if the appropriate time pops up. What I mean by this is, and I sort of do it in all my games, and again, this is something you can hash out in session 0 if your players really don't want to, die. I guess that's something you can talk about. But in D&D, player deaths really, I would say actually are an important part of the game. It makes you more attached to your characters knowing you can lose them. So if your characters do something really stupid, if they make some really bad decisions and get themselves into a really dangerous situation and end up dying, don't fudge the rolls and don't, have an NPC come in to save the day magically out of nowhere. Let their character die. They can always make a new character and rejoin the game with a new character, or if someone is able to bring them back from the dead, that can happen as well. But let players die if they get into that situation, because again, it makes for really memorable moments in your games. Some of the most memorable moments in the games that I've run or played in are when characters have died. It's sad, but it's also badass. It's exciting at the same time. And like I said, it really, when that happens, I guarantee the first time a character dies in a campaign that you are running, all of your players will be like, oh wow. They will immediately become more attached. If they're enjoying their character, they will immediately become more attached to the character that they are running. They will immediately feel more brought into the world that's around them. So certainly don't be scared of that. Like I said, it's part of the game, and I think that's one thing that a lot of particularly newer DMs, or even if you've been DMing for a long period of time but you haven't had a character die on you yet, a lot of the time DMs are scared of that happening. I really don't want my characters to die. I really don't want them to have a TPK, a total party killer, or anything like that. But at the end of the day, if they make bad decisions, let them make those bad decisions and let them deal with the consequences. Or, sometimes they get really unlucky. Sometimes they're up against a mob of enemies that are doing really well with their attack rolls. And again, that's one of the more exciting parts of the game. So certainly don't shy away from that sort of stuff. Even though it can be a little bit intimidating, it is a really important part of the game. Tip number 9. We are nearly at the end of my top D&D DM tips. Less can be more. Now, I mean a few things by this. One of the main ones is you do not have to go into a Shakespearean description of every room that you encounter. Every NPC that you walk past doesn't have to have an elaborate tale of the fabric that they're wearing. No. You can give very simple, basic descriptions to keep the game moving along. If it's something that's really important, or if it's an area that's really integral to a specific part in the story, sure, obviously you can go a little bit more in depth into your descriptions. And, in-depth descriptions can certainly make the game feel more real and bring players into the game. But one thing that really sucks the fun out of the game is when a dungeon master is spending like 80% of the session talking, running the mouth, because they're describing in excessive amounts of detail everything that the party runs into, and the wizards just stand there waiting to cast fireball. Like it's a bit of a cliche, but you don't want your players to have to constantly sit back and wait as all these elaborate descriptions come out. You don't have to go over the top with all that sort of stuff. And sort of in the same vein of less can be more, you do not have to go over the top with battle maps, with miniatures, with elaborate constructions for your combat encounters, or printing out on parchment different letters for the party to physically. That sort of stuff's fantastic, and if you enjoy doing that sort of stuff, great. But that is not needed for an exceptional D&D campaign. Dungeons and Dragons is primarily based around your imagination. You can have an amazing campaign with nothing more than your character sheets and maybe a mat you can draw on. You don't even need tokens necessarily. You could use dice or bottle caps for tokens, and you can still have a fantastic campaign. Obviously, like I said, if you enjoy going to that sort of extravagant level, having the miniatures and the battle maps and the all of that sort of stuff, then fantastic. That's great. That'll certainly enhance the experience as well. But it is not necessary to have a really great campaign, and it's not necessary for you to do those things to be a fantastic dungeon master. You can be a great dungeon master, like I said, with nothing more than a few bits of paper and some friends who are keen to play. My goodness, that sounded corny. I do apologise. Now, number 10, there is an 11th, so stay tuned for the extra bonus 11th one. Number 10, very, very important, be fair. Do not... Obviously, as a Dungeon Master, your job is to be fair, but it's important to ensure that you're not even subconsciously playing favourites between the players in the group. You don't want to be constantly rewarding or giving items or bonuses to a particular player for no seemingly reason while the other players miss out. So obviously you want to be fair with that sort of stuff. But also be fair with the rulings that you make in-game as well. If your enemies can flank and get advantage by flanking, the players should be able to do that, and vice versa. Anything that the players can do, the enemies should also be able to do. So, it's important to sort of, I guess, for realism as well, to play fair in that sort of aspect of the game. Ensure that your rulings, just in general, aren't made, I guess, by your own bias. So just because maybe you as a person don't like a particular plan, don't have that plan fail just because it's not what you would have done. Let the party enact what they want to do and have it, have the dice land where they may, and see what comes of it. It's really important not to, I guess, put your wants and desires, I guess, on the rulings that you make. It's really important for a dungeon master to be as fair as they possibly can with all rulings they make in the game. That really gives the players the agency to impact the world around them, and to really feel like they're important to their D&D world. And the bonus one, which is very, very, very important, but probably doesn't need to be a whole tip on its own, is have fun. I don't know why, but for some reason there's this conception out there that the players are meant to be having all the fun. It's the Dungeon Master's job to provide the players with that fun. It's important, obviously, it's really important for the players to have fun and for the players to have a good time, but it is equally as important for you as a Dungeon Master to enjoy yourself and to have fun doing what you're doing as well. If you're not having fun being a Dungeon Master, then don't do it. At the end of the day, otherwise it's not going to be a very enjoyable campaign. For the players either, they'll probably notice that you're not enjoying it. So it's really important that you get to have fun doing what you're doing as well. Even though you're not technically a player in the game, you're still a player as far as the Dungeons and Dragons goes. You're still there to hang out with your mates and have a good time. So it's important to make sure that you are enjoying running the game, and if for whatever reason you're not enjoying running the game, try to address that and work out those kinks so that you can think either, all right, maybe I don't really enjoy being a Dungeon Master, I'll just stick to being a player, or I really do enjoy being a Dungeon Master, but I have these things that I don't particularly like when my players do, or something, working out what it is that works for you. Because if you're not having fun, I guarantee the campaigns aren't going to last for very long. At the end of the day, that's the whole reason we play the game, is to have a good time and hang out with mates. So that is my top 10 tips for being a good Dungeon Master. Hope you guys enjoyed that. I thought, with Alex being away at the moment, thought I might as well take an opportunity to dive a little bit deeper into being a Dungeon Master and some tips and tricks to help better your craft and your abilities in that avenue. Now, I do have a joke. It's one of my better ones, if I do say so myself. I almost don't want to say it purely because I want to see Alex's reaction, but I am going to say it anyway. I know this is everyone's favourite part of the stream, is the joke. All right. Did you hear about the sensitive rogue thief? He took everything personally. I've got to say, that's one of my favourite D&D jokes that I've said. The very sensitive rogue thief, he took everything personally. I think that's great. I love it. I hope you guys are all groaning excessively after having heard that. But yes, I will certainly ensure that Alex hears it one way or another. But thank you so much for coming and hanging out with me on Married with Dragons today. Fingers crossed, hopefully Alex will be able to join me for next episode, so you don't get stuck looking at my ugly mug all episode. But yeah, we will be back same time, same place on the Game on Oz channel, 8 o'clock on Thursday. And yeah, after having a bit of a play around with the list, we're thinking of maybe incorporating some of these sorts of top whatever lists into our episodes as well. So let us know if you enjoyed it. But I certainly had fun hanging out and chatting about all things D&D anyway. So until next time, thank you so much for hanging out, and I'll see you then.
Hey legend, thanks for watching the show. If you want to make sure that you're up to date with all of the Game on Oz content here on YouTube, make sure you click the subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next video.